Making repairs with our children when we have that disconnect from them, right? First off, we need to own the part of us that's created the disconnect. So I overreacted. You can name that, right? And then you can name, this part of me that gets really angry. So you're helping your kid to understand this part of you. You're not abdicating your responsibility. You're still taking the responsibility. And you're helping them to understand how the disconnect happened. And then you might say, I've got this angry part that comes up and it's connected to. Help your kid to understand what's going on inside of you. It will help them understand what goes on inside of them when they get angry. Angry parts almost always are protecting parts that hold a different kind of vulnerability. Right? I remember when my kid again, when she was, I think about 5, getting ready to go out, and the office was at the front of my house. Very, very dark green paint, and a tiny bit of it had chipped off. You could see the white underneath. And I'm getting the dog's leashes on, I'm getting our coats on, and Maya starts picking at the wall. And I said, honey, don't do that, because if you pick at that, the paint will come off, and then Daddy's got to repaint the whole wall, right? Okay, Daddy. Zipped up, leashed the dog, turn around, and she's picking at the wall again. Didn't catch myself and flew into anger. What did I just tell you? What did I just tell you? Thankfully, I was able to see this little 5-year-old's eyes widen and lip begin to tremble and shrink away from me and say, oh, okay, honey, I'm so sorry. That was my angry part and it was just overreacting. I'm so sorry that happened. And then I got curious, how come I got so inflamed in that moment, right? Because she was disrespecting me. The part of me that holds some vulnerability around being disrespected. It's what I was told when I didn't do what my parents wanted. I was disrespecting them. She wasn't disrespecting me. She forgot, and she's playing with the paint on the wall. She's 5. But because it landed on this part of me that felt disrespected, the angry part feels entitled to come up. I didn't share all that with her because she was 5, but I was aware of it. Right? Oh, I can get triggered into feeling disrespected. There's a part of me that holds that, right? That makes meaning in that way. Good to know, because it gets in the way of me seeing her. Right? So the repair is for me to take responsibility. I overreacted. Honey, I'm sorry. That was about Daddy, not about you. It can be humbling to say to your kid, I was wrong. If you struggle with making the apology, there's a really good reason. I'm going to speak to that more in the last video, the further thoughts video. And the apology is not a repair unless there's a behavior change that goes with it, right? How many times have we heard from someone, oh, I'm sorry, and then they do the same thing again. I'm sorry, and they do the same thing again. The apology may be genuine in that moment from that part. That part is sorry, but it may not be the part that did the behavior, and it may not lead to a behavior change. That's how we walk the talk. That's how we know the apology is genuine. You can repair at any time in your relationship with your kids. I've known kids that have been disconnected adults from their parents for 20 years, right? There's a grudge. Something happened 20 years ago. If you haven't seen your kid in 20 years, if you want to be with your kid, give him a call. Say, you know that thing that happened 20 years ago? I overreacted. I'm sorry. I miss you. Or not. But the not is painful. That disconnect is painful. The 8th video in this series is about legacy, about what gets passed down to us and that we pass down often unconsciously. There's conversations about dominant culture and the expectations that dominant culture brings to us, community, what that brings to us, history, what that tells us about how we should be, and if we're not, how we're kind of, really not good enough, really not making the grade. One of the participants talks about the history of disconnection in her family and from her family. She talks about how, language that feels inclusive actually makes a demand on you. We as women need to do this. In our family, we never do that. Or a history of it being unsafe to speak. Right? Many women have been taught by their mothers, who have been taught by their mothers, who have been taught by their mothers, that it's not safe to speak out. That becomes a legacy burden. It may have been very unsafe for your great-grandmother to speak out in very concrete ways. She may have been threatened with her life. She may have been beaten. That was not uncommon a few generations ago. In some communities, it's not uncommon now. So she will have taught her daughter that it's not safe to speak out, especially around men. Who will have taught her daughter that, who may have taught you that. That's how these burdens come down the line. It may not be explicit. It could be implicit. It could be the odd comment. Don't bother your father now, he's reading. It's really helpful to identify these legacies that get passed down so that we can stop doing it, so that we can stop passing it down. Right? There's a conversation about, the need to be better. What's that about? If I need to be better, it means I'm not good enough as I am. If we can hear these shaming parts inside of us, become aware of them, we can choose not to pass them down. Final video in the series talks about the challenges of unconventional parenting. I think Darren Young kicks it off with, what is conventional parenting? Which is a good question. I think if we look to dominant culture, if we look to the media that tells us what conventional parenting is, it's usually two able-bodied people, a male and a female, white, middle class, with two kids. You've all seen these pictures, you know them, right? If you Google family and images, that's what you'll see the majority of the time. You have to Google a bit harder to find an Asian family, to find a black family, to find a family where somebody has special needs, or to find a family where somebody is visibly disabled. So we've got dominant culture telling us what conventional parenting looks like. And so we worry about it, right? We worry about our acceptability when we're in public if we don't match that template. There's various parenting styles or ways of parenting that carry stigma. Divorce can still carry stigma. Having a special needs kids, Leslie speaks to. Single mums can feel overwhelmed, and they're just focused on survival, but easily find themselves judged when they're out with their kids. Darren talks about raising a black boy in white culture and how there's demands to be a rock star parent, right? You can't just parent. You're a black woman parenting a black son. You're being watched. People have judgments. And if we get defensive around those judgments, right, if we have to parent in a particular way when we're being watched, then it's hard to stay connected with our kids, and it's hard to stay connected in that heart-to-heart way. So here's the thing to bear in mind. If someone's critical of you, if someone's judgmental about you, if someone's looking down their nose at you and rolling their eyes at how you're parenting, that tells you a lot about them. That tells you a lot about how they like to be critical in the world, how they have parts that like to judge other people in the world, how they like to feel superior in the world. Good for them, right? It doesn't tell you anything about you. Unless you've done something deliberately to offend them or you've transgressed in some way, well, then you need to take responsibility for that. But otherwise, if you're out playing with your kid, if you've got those special little games that other people may not even understand, but they're a joy between the two of you, and you notice someone's judging you, criticizing you, talking about you, as best you can, hold in your awareness that that's about them, that's about what they need to do. If you get triggered, there's a part of you that worries about being a deadbeat dad because you're divorced, about being a single mom and maybe not being able to, do that as well as a two-parent family. See if later you can listen into those parts of you and let them know you've got this. You're there. Their concerns are real, but they don't need to drive how you are when you're out in public with your kid or even in private. Right? I think Darren's right. There is no conventional parenting. We all hold this as a myth. And then we worry about being judged on the basis of a myth. Let's celebrate some of the remarkable diversity that we see in the communities we live in around how to parent and how to do that from a place of love.